The Witch From Mercury is the latest anime series in the Gundam franchise. Like the past few Gundam series, this show takes place in an alternative timeline involving giant robots, space colonization, and war. The series has a few familiar ingredients of political corruption and dangerous new technology, but also aspects of critiquing capitalism, healthcare, and the military-industrial complex. One of the trailblazing aspects of this show is that the central protagonist and Gundam pilot is a woman, going by the name Soleta Mercury. She's an immigrant from Mercury who comes to study at a space colony university for mobile suit development, which is one part her dream for being a pilot and one part representation to solidify business relations. In the first episode, she volunteers to fight a duel in mobile suits to get back at a bully, using her special and rare Gundam mecha that is not referred to as a Gundam since those are outlawed. When she wins, her prize is attaining the marriage of Miorin, a second-year student desperate to get out of an arranged marriage for business convenience. Soleta feels awkward about the proposal as she was initially interested in boys, but is clearly forming a romantic bond with Miorin, especially given how close they're depicted in the opening and closing animations, so the show really is leading towards a lesbian relationship, although it could be argued that she is more bisexual based on how the following episodes proceed. For these many story aspects, The Witch from Mercury received plenty of praise from Gundam fans and newcomers. It also received the now typical response from the outrage merchants. A certain social media account, which will not be named to avoid giving them further press, warned Gundam fans that they needed to gatekeep their community amid this new show. Elaborating further, the account tried to argue that they were not inciting a culture war, but trying to prevent one. This is not true. If a culture war was really trying to be avoided, gatekeeping is the last thing that you would stress. Gatekeeping is all about limiting access to a fandom's audience. It is often viewed as preservation because those who do it believe they're protecting their fandom from fake fans or normies. The truth is that gatekeeping is the antithesis of the preservation of a fandom. Fandoms do not grow if they limit their accessibility. Gundam didn't continue on for over 4 decades and generate the following that it has now because it kept the normies out, or just kept appealing to the same demographic. For fans who are not complete jerks, normies are just potential fans. We need new blood because franchises do not grow if they become rigid clubs with high bars of entry. They become further insular and uncomfortable for anyone else to become interested. I have watched a lot of Gundam anime myself and built 5 Gunpla models when I was a teenager, but I do not expect any new fan to have done all this to become a Gundam fan. Have you watched a Gundam movie or show and loved it? Well, congratulations, you're a Gundam fan. No purchase necessary. These fictitious barriers of entry into fandom are not only composed by the worst people of the fanbase, but a part of the fanbase that often has the least understanding of the franchise. And by that, I don't mean that they haven't watched every Gundam show. If said fans have poor media literacy skills, one could easily watch every Gundam anime and still misread what they are saying. The people claiming that The Witch from Mercury has turned Gundam woke do not know what they are talking about. This is mostly because the word woke has lost all meaning, but it also stems from a misinterpretation of what Gundam has been. Contrary to what some may believe, Gundam wasn't just about cool robots and selling Gunpla model kits. Now true, there are iterations of Gundam that do this more than others, but there is much more to Gundam than the simplistic commercialism of Gundam build fighters, or the goofiness of Mobile Fighter G Gundam. To better understand this point of view, let's go through a checklist of what one Facebook user in a Gundam group used to determine that Gundam has now gone woke with The Witch from Mercury. Now this post might be satirical, I haven't really fully vetted it, but based on the few dopey online posts I've seen regarding Gundam being woke, this was the only post that came close to defining the terms. The first point is that the series has a black main character and is thus pandering to Black Lives Matter. This is absurd on its face because this declaration assumes that every time there's a black main character in a piece of media that did not have black main characters before, that it is pandering to Black Lives Matter and not just a genuine choice by the creators. So, you know, this is just a racist take. Also, Gundam has had a number of black supporting characters in past shows, so it shouldn't be that big of a deal that a person of color takes center stage. The second point is that because the main character is female, the show is somehow pandering to feminists. So, this is just being sexist because a female main character even exists and plays to a woman audience. There might also be a whiff of calling Suletta a Mary Sue character for being so powerful in winning her first mobile suit duel. Just a reminder, the first Gundam series had the teenage hero Amuro Ray hop in a Gundam and blow up 2 mobile suits without any training. I mean, he thumbed through a manual for 2 minutes, and then just knew how to be a Gundam pilot. Also, to better counter this point, there's an entire prologue special for the Witch from Mercury all about Suletta and how she has been piloting since an early age. So let's just shoot down that Mary Sue argument right now before it starts. This complaining about pandering to women is particularly bizarre because most of the fans who helped prop up Gundam from the start have been women. Gundam creator Yoshiyuki Tomino addressed how the early stages of Gundam fandom were shaped by young women. In a 1998 interview, he remarked, "What I want modern-day Gundam fans to understand is that Gundam wasn't nurtured by the PLA model enthusiasts. It was young women who first came to the after-recording studio, and Gundam is a work that began with their support, and it was a work that had no connection to the popularity of Gundam PLA models. So I think the most important thing is creating a work that will attract those kind of girls to it again. I don't think movies as an entertainment industry can succeed without touching on that kind of fundamental portion." So yeah, chicks do dig giant robots. The third point is that because the show features lesbians, it is now pandering to the LGBT community. You'll notice that the poster never expands on how such associations are bad. Why is it bad that an anime appealed to the LGBTQ community? The answer as to why the poster feels this way, of course, is homophobia. It's just assuming having gay characters is bad for an audience that presumably already thinks that anything featuring gay people is terrible on those merits alone. Also, to those who think that Gundam never pandered to the gay community before, a simple response would be, have you ever watched Gundam Wing? Have you ever noticed how ridiculously gay Gundam Wing becomes? We'll talk a little bit more about Gundam Wing in a bit. The fourth point, however, kind of baffles me. The show features characters who are Martians. I'm assuming he means Mercurians, and this staging is apparently woke because it panders to minorities. Okay, so what? Allegories are offensive to you now? Do you not want stories to draw from real-life observations anymore? I'm sorry if you thought that Gundam was meant to be strict escapism, but it hasn't exactly been that since its inception, what with all the anti-war and anti-fascist elements. And finally, there's the complaint about gay marriage, which I thought he already covered by complaining about lesbians, but I guess he wasn't done yet. At least this point is further expanded upon. The reasoning for the gay marriage portrayal in the first episode being seen as bad is because it implies conservative ways are old and outdated. It should be noted, conservatism is brought up in the show less as a political ideology, and more as referring to the main character coming from a traditional background. Mioran's remarks are not so much a condemnation of conservatism as they are admitting that same-sex coupling is less common within certain cultures. If you think the mere presence of gay people and gay marriage in media with better representation makes your political beliefs seem old and outdated, then, well, maybe, they are old and outdated. As an even more absurd claim, he argues that the show isn't being fair to conservatives by never giving the main character a choice in her sexuality. Straight media never receives this absurd demand or equal level of criticism, so it's ridiculous to demand this out of queer-centric narratives. Even though The Witch from Mercury doesn't have to make the concession about giving the protagonist a choice in genders for marriage, it actually does by episode 3, showcasing how Suletta is interested in boys and even proposed to by one. So, how could this Facebook user in a Gundam group be so dim about Gundam? Well, culture wars of this nature are often stoked by people who either previously had no interest in the culture or pretended to have an interest so that they can pretend they are credible in their ranting. It's why reactionaries will always start their whining with, "I used to be a fan," and then cite their frame of reference from many years ago. It's why you'll see a talking head on Fox News bickering about gay marriage representation ruining new comic books when, in all likelihood, they have not picked up a comic book in decades. If you haven't been a fan or engaged with said fandom in years, then why do you even care what is happening with it? To these culture warriors, the fandom itself does not matter. They're more interested in what it represents. The media itself is only a means to an end. This dork on Twitter tried to ignite a Gundam culture war by reminding the audience of other franchises that he claimed went woke. He wanted people to remember the reactions to Star Trek, DC Comics, and Lord of the Rings. He wants you to think of how these franchises were compromised by normies and wokeness. Except this whole gatekeeping of Gundam through cultural paranoia doesn't really work because it doesn't have the same pop culture spread as the fandoms he mentioned. Gundam has been an anime franchise in Japan since 1979, but its greater fan base in America has only been active for roughly 22 years. This means you won't get American baby boomers or Gen Xers crying about how SJWs ruined their childhood recollections of Gundam. This ruined childhood narrative is usually a major factor in trying to stoke these culture wars in the first place. It entices people who never cared about this fandom in years or ever to suddenly become very angry and passionate about it, to demand the franchise get back to its traditional roots. Without that aged outrage, Gundam's political leanings won't garner much feuding on an external level outside the fandom. Also, to the poster's second point, bringing up previous reactionary responses to so-called woke franchises actually does more to hurt his argument for gatekeeping. Like, really, what do people remember about the Star Trek controversy? Well, they recall people getting really mad that the new show featured more women, people of color, and different sexualities, despite the staging of characters fitting the inclusivity that Star Trek has always had. They might remember this masked doofus called Doom who tried to claim that the Star Trek Discovery staff were furious about their show failing, because they somehow thought that YouTubers were bringing it down and that they were so angry they punched a television. This claim was entirely based on a rumor posted on 4chan that was itself intentionally placed to make the grifter look like a fool for taking the bait. He really wanted to believe that he had enough influence to get Star Trek Discovery cancelled, and somebody took advantage of that to make him look like a fool. Meanwhile, in reality, Star Trek Discovery has continued for 5 seasons, and there have been even more Star Trek shows with even more diverse casts. Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks are some of the best Star Trek shows since Deep Space Nine, and many Trek fans really do seem to like these shows. What do people remember about the cries of DC Comics going woke? Well, they recall reactionaries throwing a fit over Superman's son Jonathan being bisexual, and confusing this character for being Kal-El because they have not been reading the current run of Superman. And this was really funny because the people who were arguing that this Superman should be making out with Lois Lane and not another man were mistakenly advocating for incest. So those arguing about Superman going woke were made to look like the fools they definitely were. Also, DC Comics is continuing on with Jonathan Kent's Superman and other comics as well. What do people remember about Lord of the Rings going woke? Well, the reactionaries are still arguing over the logistics of how there can be black dwarves and black elves in a fantasy narrative. They also draw false equivalencies like, well, if Lord of the Rings can have black elves, then I guess we can have a white Martin Luther King movie. It's not the same thing. Elves are a fictional race from a fantasy novel, and Martin Luther King is a real historical figure. When people remember these reactions, they are not inspired to agree with the outrage and overreact as so many outrage merchants have before. Since so much of the Gundam fanbase is not as adrift in reading Gundam's political messaging or its history or even outrage culture itself, these cries about gatekeeping Gundam were rightly mocked. The grift of the culture war to rile up fandoms has become so predictable and tiresome that the vast majority of Gundam fans are not falling for this cry of Gundam going woke. Because by the metrics of what would be considered woke, Gundam has already been catering to that part of the fandom long before the Witch from Mercury. But there are always some retorts to all this as an excuse to be angry. So here are a few familiar ones that we can tackle right now before they're even asked. Gundam was never this political. Whenever someone claims that Gundam was never political, one scene from the original series is always mentioned. The scene is between Zeon's leader Degwin Zabi and his son Gihren. Degwin asks if Gihren is familiar with the legacy of Adolf Hitler. Gihren responds that he's aware of Hitler and aims to be just as driven to lead Zeon as Hitler led the Nazis. After Gihren leaves the room, Degwin mutters that the Nazis lost, but what he's really thinking is, oh I raised a fascist who doesn't understand political history. So yeah, Gundam was always political. There are so many entries in the franchise with a laser focus on themes of anti-war, anti-imperialism, and anti-fascism. You would have to be actively ignoring the storytelling and be completely media illiterate to say something as galling as Gundam was never political. Even apolitical entries in Gundam are themselves political, because they made a choice not to address politics that have previously been in other Gundam entries. Gundam never catered to gay people, and it's going to be ruined if it does. Whenever someone says this, every Gundam fan's fingers immediately draw towards Gundam Wing. While none of the 5 pretty boy Gundam pilots of the show are ever confirmed to be in gay relationships, they are... Hang on, let me check my notes here. Oh yes. They're homoerotic as Yes, most of the pilots have girlfriends in that show, but they treat them like absolute garbage.
I'll kill you.
Hiro, I know too much about you. Are you still gonna kill me?
Yeah.
Gundam creator Yoshiyuki Tomino also brought up how there was clearly gay subtext in the rivalry between Amuro Ray and Char Aznavour. And if you've watched how their relationship has developed over the course of many series and movies, it becomes absurd not to pick up on this. The only reason they're making the Gundam pilot a woman is because of feminism. If someone says Gundam is pandering because a woman is now a Gundam pilot, they forget that women have already piloted Gundams. You might remember Christine from Gundam 0080, who was a primary character and the pilot of the Gundam in that story. Now, some people might see this and use Gundam 0080 to devalue the Witch from Mercury, stating that the Witch from Mercury is not a real trailblazer since there was already a female Gundam pilot and central character. And if you have done that, then you have fallen into my trap. Christine is a Gundam pilot, but far from the main character of Gundam 0080. That series revolved around the civilian child Al, the Zeon pilot Bernie, and the Gundam pilot Christine. Of the 3 of them, Christine is the least developed, doesn't have much of an arc, and has the least amount of screen time of all the 3 characters. Making the argument that Christine was a better female character instead of Suletta only weakens this argument of devaluation. Okay, fine, I don't watch Gundam, but I still need to talk about it being woke. If you don't watch Gundam and you have no intention of watching Gundam, why should anybody care what you have to say about the Witch from Mercury? More to the point, why do you care? If it's not something that you're watching and its mere existence doesn't interfere with your life in any way, then why are you even talking about this? I mean, the most relevant answer is that the outsiders making these points are trying to reinforce a social norm under the guise of keeping the fandom pure. Even though all the political issues the outrage merchants rant about have been reflective of Gundam as a whole. If you really want to be taken seriously, maybe you should try the soup before you spit in it. There are many more examples to prove how Gundam has been all the things that people complain about as woke, but it doesn't really matter. As I said, Gundam fans are wise to the provocateurs of culture wars, and the provocateurs themselves do not care about Gundam on these media merits because that is not what they're really arguing about. Going back to that Twitter poster again, this was the other post he made about Gundam. If you're afraid of people bringing a culture war to your fandom, good. Y'all brought the culture war to us. We're just calling it out and finishing it. First off, nobody within Gundam fandom is afraid of Gundam being caught up in a culture war, because there was no culture war to begin with. Second, nobody brought the culture war to you. You did. You did so the moment that you declared a lesbian Gundam pilot of color to be woke. You calling it out is an attempt to incite a culture war. And guess what? It's not working. And lastly, finishing a culture war? What does that even look like? Like, what is your end goal here? To stop media from pandering to different groups and telling inherently political stories? Because that is a really pathetic forever war. But perhaps the most detrimental element of this mindset is how it muddies the waters of genuine criticism. Trying to force the narrative of media either being woke or not woke places criticism into an uncomfortable binary. Culture war grifters want to create the narrative that anybody who says anything positive about a perceived piece of woke media is only virtue signaling, and that anything negative about it is the subjugated truth. They want you to believe that any opinion that doesn't praise the Witch from Mercury is condemned as racist, sexist, and homophobic, to craft the idea that there is no negative critique of the series that is racist, sexist, or homophobic, and that people just don't want to hear the truth. And look, if you don't like The Witch from Mercury for its writing, characters, or animation, that's fine. I'm a Gundam fan, and there are certainly series that I do not enjoy. But when the loudest voices of negative criticism are from outrage merchants using dog whistles, voicing negative criticism can seem difficult if it lumps you into this camp. This makes more nuanced opinions harder to form because culture wars create an us versus them mentality. The anti-woke grifters don't just want you to view The Witch from Mercury as a bad Gundam entry, but an entry that will destroy everything that you loved about Gundam. Or, perhaps more accurately, pretended to love about Gundam. This causes people not bothered by an anime franchise featuring a lesbian of color to immediately gravitate towards the camp of praising the show, just to get back at the complainers. And while that may seem good on its face, I don't want people to love The Witch from Mercury unconditionally out of spite. I want them to love it because it's a well-made show with gorgeous animation and writing that reflects Gundam's best attributes. Outrage merchants force a culture war upon media where there was previously none, an attempt to render all criticism of the fandom completely external to the media itself. And I would rather talk about The Witch from Mercury beyond this discourse. I want to discuss how the show has remarkable similarities to Revolutionary Girl Utena. I want to talk about the speedy world building of this new Gundam universe and how it compares to previous Gundam entries. I adore digging into how the show develops its themes of corporate greed and human evolution that brings about conflict and trivializes relationships. Also, Suletta is so damn cute and pure that it almost breaks my heart to know that something horrible will happen to her, per the Gundam tradition and foreshadowed in the incredibly violent prologue. When the series finishes, I will probably make a video that digs deeper into this. But it's difficult to have these conversations if the initial reactions to the show by outrage merchants, and more importantly, the consumers of outrage merchants, are immediately calling this show woke. The bad faith actors are never going to go away. We can ignore them, sure, but if these types of responses are not addressed, they could easily become normalized by those unfamiliar with the fandom. When talking about a fandom you love, the most annoying thing is to have the first comment be, "Oh, I heard that franchise went woke with this entry," spoken with an insulting tone. It's annoying, not just because that comment means nothing more than blind toxicity, but because it becomes exhausting trying to explain why such declarations, often regurgitated by outrage merchants, are complete garbage not founded on anything within the media itself. If you take outrage merchants and hold their feet to the fire and expose the phony anger and obvious grifting, their power of influence will eventually weaken. And we are seeing that weakness in full display with the failed culture war on Gundam. Soon after The Witch from Mercury debuted, the Gundam culture war discourse pretty much died for obvious reasons. Nobody arguing for a Gundam culture war ever really cared all that much about Gundam in the first place, if they ever did at all. And they definitely didn't understand what Gundam was all about to read the fan reactions properly. It was ultimately, and thankfully, a tempest in a teapot. Meanwhile, on a brighter note, Gundam fans have continued to enjoy The Witch from Mercury, rejoicing in all the new fans who are coming to this show. The show is still airing as of this writing, and I'm honestly enjoying it. It could falter by the finale, sure, but my feelings currently are so far so good. And if you're someone who is unfamiliar with Gundam, now is the perfect time to hop on board. The Witch from Mercury requires no foreknowledge of Gundam to jump right in and start watching. It's one of the most accessible anime franchises franchises to dig right into. Within The Witch from Mercury, there's a great saying that Suletta repeats from childhood. If you run away, you gain 1. But if you go forward, you gain 2. Gundam is going forward and will only gain more allure thanks to its appeal to a grander audience. It won't go much further if it just keeps going back to what it was before. So those unfamiliar with Gundam, or so-called normies, are more than welcome. There's plenty of room in Gundam for everyone, and don't let any so-called fan tell you otherwise.
The future depends on a ship called White Base and its secret weapon. A homeless boy with powers beyond comprehension.
Those lightning reflexes. It's like he sees the future.
His name, Amaral Ray. His weapon, Gundam.